everybody for coming. This is what we needed it to be. The town set out on a few goals for the Queen Sewell Watershed Project, and this was one of the items that we itemized early on. We thought it'd be a great idea to do a practical workshop. I really want to thank the DPW for getting us set up and giving us the ability to come out here and pretend that we can actually do this. I really want to thank Horsley Witten. Michelle West has been instrumental in us really sculpting our ideology on how we're going to view our stormwater here at the town of Bourne. As you can imagine, this is a little bit, this is a small little project, but it's a bigger idea. Nature-based solutions is something the town of Bourne is really going to try to prioritize going forward. The goals of the 40s, 50s, and 60s and building up our, our town to get the water off the roads is no longer the primary goal. We really need to start treating water as well. In this workshop, this ideology, this is really going to help get us there. So thanking Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program also for actually funding the grant. This hits a lot of goals for the town, for the strategic goals, selectmen's goals, also a lot of the goals for the MS4 stormwater regulatory requirements that we have here in the town of Bourne. So that's enough for me. And here's Michelle West from Horsley Witten. And thanks to the Horsley Witten team for coming today too. That's a big group. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Tim. It is so exciting to be here. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to build rain gardens and to teach people about why they're important and why we care. So a rain garden is something that everyone can do at their own home, so that we each can play a part in trying to fix the water quality issues that we face in Bourne and throughout Cape Cod and the state as well. So what is part of causing the water quality problems in our bays and our ponds? It's stormwater runoff. Stormwater runoff is just what happens when it rains on surfaces that are hard or impervious, like our rooftops, our driveways, our roads, the things that we need to be able to live and to have a community. But if we don't kind of care for that, it can cause water quality problems. So the rain itself is clean when it falls from the sky, mostly. We know there's a few things in there, but what happens is it hits our rooftops, and a lot of times the downspouts will be directed to a driveway, and the driveway flows to a road, and the road flows to a catch basin in the street, and then it goes into a pipe straight to our ponds and embayments. And it carries all those things that build up on our driveways, like soil can be a pollutant, it can carry bacteria, there could be pet waste, animal waste, there could be fertilizers, oils from our cars, all of that can get washed into our waters that are so important to us. And that's what we want to try to improve, try to treat that water. So if we can keep the rooftop runoff that's clean, if we can let that soak into the ground naturally like it did before we built our environment, that goes a long way to making a difference in water quality. So rain gardens are one way that we can do this at our own home. So what is a rain garden? Some people think, well, it's got rain in the name, it's probably wet, it's probably a pond. I don't want standing water in my yard. It's not a wet feature, it's not a pond. It won't have the standing water if it's built correctly and in the right place. It is meant to capture the water from a downspout. Here you can see we have two downspouts from the town hall roof, a section of the roof. We'll direct it into this rain garden. It's going to have a flat bottom so that it fills up like a bathtub, and then slowly soaks into the ground. When it really rains hard, like if we're getting 8 inches in a day or something like that, a rain garden is not intended to soak all of that water into the ground. It's really meant for those frequent smaller storm events. Every little bit counts. But you do need to know where the water is going to go when you do get those big events. And in this case, the water was already headed across the grass towards the parking lot, and that's where it will go after our rain garden is put in. But we're going to be capturing a lot of that water in the garden itself. So what size do we want to focus on for a rain garden? A lot of people think of the 1-inch rain event as the important rain event to capture with your rain garden. And that's because that's the most frequent 90% of all rain events that we get throughout the year are 1 inch or less. They're the frequent small events, and that's what washes off all of the dirt and all of those pollutants that build up on our paved surfaces. So if we can manage that 1 inch event, we're handling most of the storms that we get in a year. And so that's what we focus on. So we were able to size this rain garden based on 1 inch of the rooftop that's flowing to it. So it sounds like it's a calculation that's really hard, but we did put together, there's a little trifold brochure here that has the basics of building a rain garden, including a little table that would help you. If you measure your rooftop, it can tell you how big that your rain garden should be based on how deep you want the rain garden. I also have a more detailed how-to guide over there that kind of steps you through all of the considerations and a little bit more information than the trifold. And then we do have, we put together a plan of this rain garden. This is not to say you do not need an engineering plan to do a rain garden at your own home, but this was so that we could have a document that we could share with everyone and everybody understood what would happen with the rain garden. And it also has a planting plan on the back for the plants that we chose for this particular site. The plants will vary based on how much sun and the type of soil that you receive at your location. This spot is on the south-facing side of the building. It doesn't have much shade. We planted sun-loving, or we will be planting sun-loving plants in this location. And we'll get into a little bit more of the details on the plants and kind of all of the nitty-gritty of the rain garden as we go through. But I just wanted to give that introduction before we got started and see if anyone has any questions. All right.
Do you have a plant list? Is that included in what you're handing out?
The plant list for today's garden is included on this plan. You could, I know that APCC on their website, they have a much bigger plant list for rain gardens in particular that you could choose from based on your conditions. If it's going to be shady, shade-loving plants versus the sun-loving and different types of soils. So that would be a good reference as well. Cape Cod Cooperative Extension apparently also has a list. Yes?
I have a question because
Yes.
I know that some people who are here today have already built a rain garden before. Some people are planning to build one, and I'm just curious as to, raise your hand if you are in one of those two categories, or if this is your first time ever even thinking about a rain garden, I guess. So raise your hand if you're planning to build one.
All right. Yay!
Expect a lot of questions. We're doing stuff like now's a great time to ask.
Okay.
And then for those of you who have already built one, raise your hand.
Maybe before we start getting into the actual physical work, I'll talk a little bit about how you find a good place for your rain garden. You could start by kind of walking around your property and thinking about where the water flows today. It's a lot easier if you might have a great spot, but it's 200 feet from where your roof or your driveway is, and how are you going to get the water you're producing to the rain garden? That's going to be really hard. So downspouts are always good locations. Some people don't have gutters. You might have a drip line along your house. You could work with that. You could collect the water at the drip line and kind of channel it into a rain garden. Flat areas are easier. It does not mean you can't put one in on a sloped piece of land. You'll just have to dig more. So this was the perfect location for a lot of reasons, and one of them is that it was mainly flat, so the digging wasn't so bad. Now, why do we have to dig more if it's sloped? It's because you really want the bottom of your rain garden to be level, to be flat, so that it fills up like that bathtub. We don't want rushing water flowing through the rain garden. It's supposed to just fill up slowly and before it leaves your rain garden or allows it to soak in. So look for a nice flat area. What if you have a place in your yard that is always flooded, it's always wet. Maybe maybe it used to be a wetland. Sometimes people think that that's a good place for a rain garden, and it's actually not for a rain garden. You could make it like restore a wetland in that location, but we don't want to put it in an area that's always wet, because that means that the soils are not set up for a rain garden. The rain garden is not supposed to be wet forever. It's just like a day after a rain event. It should have already soaked in. It should not pond water for it to work correctly. So you don't want to necessarily look for those wet holes. You want to maybe capture the water further uphill before it gets down to that wetland area. Other things that you could look for, like I said earlier, you want to make sure you understand where the water will go once it does fill up. If we get those really big storm events and it is going to flood your rain garden, you want to have a good sense of where it's going to go. If you didn't change kind of the direction of flow from before to after, then you're no problem, but you don't want to change it and suddenly when it floods, it's going into your house. So that's something to think about. Make sure you understand kind of the overflow piece. Other considerations as the soil. We guessed that we had sandy soil here from looking at soil maps that are available online. But then we also happened to do a soil test here, and we confirmed that it is indeed really sandy and with a high infiltration rate. So as we say in the guide here, you don't have to put new soil in. You could use just the soil you have. You could just dig a shallow depression and use that. But if you have really sandy soil like we do, we want to put some compost back in to help the plants grow, just to kind of slow the water down a little bit more than just the sand. I think all the beautiful plants that we have would struggle a little bit if we planted them straight in sand. So that's how we kind of came up with our design here. We over-excavated, so we dug deeper than we want the rain garden to be in the end, so that we can put back a mix of compost and soil for the bottom of the rain garden. We only want this rain garden to be 6 inches deep, so very shallow. You could even go 3 inches deep. You could make it a very shallow depression. It would just be a bigger footprint. So we chose 6 inches deep for this, and we're putting the compost back in, so that'll be part of what we're doing today. Any questions on that? Yes?
So what have you done so far? Tell us exactly what you did here.
Good question. What we did here is we didn't want to completely put the volunteers through back-breaking work. So luckily DPW offered to bring an excavator here, and we dug this out earlier this week to that overly deep depth for us. But before we started, we took a can of spray paint, and so if you do a hand sketch or something, if you want to kind of draw it out for your own rain garden, you can use spray paint to mark out the footprint of where you want the rain garden to be. So what we did was we marked where we wanted the bottom of the rain garden to be, and then the edges, so that we want just really shallow side slopes from the bottom to kind of existing grade. So we made one hardened flat lip here. So when it fills up like a bathtub, this is where it's going to go first. And our berm will remain intact. Yeah, and it's just a couple inches. I mean, it doesn't have to be crazy. And we have a tamp for the berm too, to make sure it's compact. Yeah, it's just like that, but
This is on the driveway end of the...
yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, we could probably have just a little bit of the berm just up to this kind of corner along this edge of these two.
Look behind me.
Level either, because we have our level spreader. This is where it's going to. We used our spray paint, we marked it out, and then the excavator came to help us and dug within our limits, and we made piles over here. We put tarps down. That's always a good idea. It helps you with cleanup at the end for your lawn. So they placed that soil there so that we could use during the build. we wanted to pull the rain garden away from the building so it wasn't right next to it. It's always a good idea to kind of keep it away from your foundation. So we got downspout extenders that we're going to be putting in. Those are the brown kind of corrugated pieces of plastic over there, so we can bring the water from the downspout to our rain garden. We also got some splash pads that we'll put at the end, just in case if the water is really coming out of that downspout really fast. We don't want it to kind of gouge out the garden itself at the end. So it's for erosive, to prevent erosion right at the end of the downspout where it comes into the garden. You could do that in different ways. You could use rocks. You could use even pavers, that sort of thing, to kind of protect where the water enters the rain garden. What are these crazy things with pink flagging over our garden? Does anyone have an idea?
People don't fall in it.
It's true. The pink is so people don't trip on the strings, but a level, nice. So we wanted to show, while we work at an engineering and planning company, we have survey equipment. You do not need survey equipment to build a rain garden. So this is one simple way that you can use at your house to make sure that the bottom of the rain garden is level. So you just put stakes in across the whole area there, and we have this nifty little string level. I'll take it off here. You can buy this at any hardware store. It has little hooks that you can hang on a string, and it tells you when it's level. And then you can measure down from the string, and it would be the same depth all the way across when it's level. And that's how you can tell. And we're going to use that today. Once we kind of fill the hole back in, we're going to be measuring off that string to make sure, or to be close enough that that the bottom is level. All right. Other questions?
Yeah. So
Yes.
the role of the plants is to
Yes, we are using plants to mimic the natural processes that happen in nature before we built our environment. The water would soak into the ground, but also the plants take up nutrients and stabilize the area with their roots. Their roots reach deep into the ground. The plants also absorb the water, and so they're a really important part to a rain garden and other types of nature-based practices.
Now the fun part, all the plants. I think both Cassandra and I both have botany backgrounds, so we're pretty excited about plants. We have a selection of 5 different species here. As Michelle said, we didn't select necessarily wetland plants because this rain garden is not intended to be wet all of the time. In an ideal world, you would select plants that are what we call facultative, ones that are used to being wet and sometimes they're used to being dry, so they can handle the different conditions within the rain garden itself. However, I think we also had to do some substitutions because sometimes it's based upon what is available in the nurseries when you go to plant. So we have butterfly weed, which is that one with the pretty orange flowers that all the butterflies like, good for pollinating. We have sweet fern, which is not actually a fern, it's a shrub, and it has a nice fragrance to it, and both of those are upland species. So we'll plant them, all around to try and get a sort of an aesthetic, as well as, stabilizing some of the slopes and things like that. This is the Susan, and this is the New England aster, which is purple. And they will bloom in the fall, bloom in late summer, and then we have some nice grasses in there to give some variety of the species. And so Cassandra put together this the planting plan for us. It's usually just a suggestion, but it shows where we want to have sort of our anchors of the 3 shrubs, which are small now and actually much smaller than the black-eyed Susans, but they will get much larger. And so we'll have those as sort of an anchor for the system. And then you've got them in clusters. to sort of mimic how things work in nature.
Yeah.
You don't usually have like a grid of, different species. You get a cluster of them because of the way they root or they sprout or they drop seeds, and then it creates a mass of one plant and then another near it.
For naturalistic planting, usually you're going to go in, we recommend odd numbers, like groups of 3, groups of 5, and then, like Amy said, it will look more naturalistic once they've filled out, and you can't pinpoint sort of a grid where the plants have been laid out.
Okay, so do you want to show us your recommended planting technique before we get started?
Sure. We'll do the techniques now, and then when we go to start to plant, we usually just sort of map them out in the area, just like you would in your garden. And then, get the spacing the way you want it to be. And then I'm going to pick a small one.
Yep.
You want to knock it out of its pot. And you can see how all the roots, this isn't too bad, but the roots are kind of put together. So you want to break those apart a little bit. And the hole that we'll put these in is roughly twice the diameter of what you've got for the plant, to give the roots some loose soil to grow out in. So, anything else there? You just want to tease them apart. This one was an easy one. Let's see if they're
Sometimes they get a bit.
Sometimes they really get, I bet you that Rebecca is pretty.
Yeah. But same process for either. And
just
then.
Claw them apart.
Yep.
And then.
We had talked about with just a few of you that we are going to be mulching this bed to fit the aesthetic that's already here. You see a mulched bed over there. We're going to tie it in so it looks like it was all intended to be that way to begin with. But you don't have to mulch your rain garden. It's helpful to use a little mulch perhaps when you plant around the planting hole. But you don't need to cover it in mulch. We're doing it for that specific reason, but it's not necessary.
Yeah, the less mulch, even the better, right? Like, we're trying to get away from the mulch aesthetic.
And the other thing in the hole, since we have a little leftover compost, we can, put a little of that in the bottom to kind of give the plant some additional nutrients.
You could let grass grow in. Grass isn't your enemy if you don't mind how it looks. Okay. Weeds aren't even your enemy if you don't mind how it looks. So it just depends on the aesthetic, where you're placing it in your landscape and what you want the end result to look like. So it makes it that gardening component, and near your house, a lot of times people will build kind of raised landscaped areas, and a rain garden is very similar. It's just the other way. It's concave instead of raised. So hopefully you can use a variety of plants that both work well in the rain garden as well as add beauty to your area. And there, like I said before, that it's not a wet area, so you don't plant wetland plants. The plants have to like it when it's dry as well as when it's raining. So that's something, sometimes people put wetland plants in there and they're like, well, they all died. Well, it's because it's mostly not wet. When you first put the plants in, you might have to water to help them get established.
And you water them? You need water?
But if you're using native plants that are appropriate for this type of condition, they're not intended that you would have to water them in the future. To get them established, yes, but they should be adapted to our environment and our climate into the future. Yeah.
How often should you water them when you first plant them?
I think that if it's not, obviously if it rains, that's great, you're good. Probably every 2 to 3 days, would you say? I mean, you can kind of you'll see them, they'll get a little sad.
So that's about an inch a week. And so if you're getting an inch a week from the sky, great. it if you're not every, at least once a week?
This is about, it's almost 1,000 square feet of rooftop that's draining here. And so the bottom of this bed is 150 square feet. So think 15 by 10 feet, like that rough shape. So you could go smaller than that. If you have a 500 square foot piece of your roof, then it would be half this size. So it really depends on what's kind of draining to your location. Most family homes, if you're just taking one downspout, it's going to be on the smaller side for that one downspout, because you can't get the whole roof usually to one downspout.
I don't have downspouts.
Okay.
I have the drip.
Yes.
What do you do to channel the water from the drip?
So what you could do you have stone or something along the drip line or nothing? No. Okay. So you could put in, it's maybe a little bit more work, but you could put in stone along the drip line and kind of have an offshoot of the stone towards the garden. Okay. So stone all along the edge and then bring it toward, and the water will soak into that stone and kind of follow the easiest path through the stone. So that would be a good way to do it. You can also, there are pipes with little holes in them, perforated pipes, so you could put a perforated pipe in the stone and then use that to tee off to your rain garden. That's a little more complicated, but that is something that you could do. Good. Stone, yes. All right, yes.
So if a homeowner wants to do this on their property, does anybody have to come out and look at it or approve their plan or anything like that?
That is a good question. I would say, first off, call DigSafe. You want to make sure, and we did, so you can see there are some flags over there. Luckily, I was a little nervous about what could be in our area where we wanted to dig. We would adjust around it, but luckily there was nothing in this area. But that's the number one thing you want to worry about, is you don't want to hit any of the lines going into your house. But you don't need to get, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tim and Stevie, but you wouldn't need to get a permit if you're. What about if you're close to wetlands?
Call me and just don't dig in the wetlands. But if you're putting a rain garden in the buffer zone, I'm not concerned.
So if you're close to a wetland, maybe check in with conservation, but otherwise there's not a building permit or another type of permit that you need, but we do want you to be safe, so call DigSafe. I do know that the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, APCC, they do have a program where someone will come out and give suggestions for rain gardens. So we're going to have, Jeff is going to be leading digging a trench. We're going to actually bury the downspout extenders just for ease of maintenance in the future. So if we need a couple of people at least to help with that, digging the trenches from the downspout. Then we're going to have folks bringing in the compost first and then some soil to build up the bottom of the rain garden. So wheelbarrow shoveling and raking, that sort of thing. And Jonas is going to lead that. And then we're going to have a group that's going to build just a little bit of a berm on this backside. So we want to keep the water in the rain garden as long as possible, and we are slightly sloping down, so we need to build it up a little bit on this downside, and that is going to be with Anne, a couple people to help her, Pink Cat, and then I'm going to be building where the water will flood over during those really big storms. We're just going to make a little level lip with these pavers. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it can be nice so that you make sure in the future, just for maintenance purposes, okay, this is the spot that it's going to go over. So we're going to make a nice level lip with these pavers. So when it does flow out, it's spread out, not a concentrated little erosive channel. Everyone for coming out. This is amazing. Look what we did.
Yes.
Pretty amazing.
Oh, and you did.
Yay, everyone! We are going to water it and maybe even see it in action by getting some water on the roof and watching it come in. We'll see. This is engineering right here.